Sarah Mitchell was tired. It was one of those evenings where the body feels heavy and the mind asks for nothing more than a quiet drive home. She had spent the afternoon running errands, a trip to the pharmacy, a stop at the grocery store, and one last visit to a clothing shop where she bought a plain gray sweater. Nothing exciting. Nothing memorable. Just the kind of ordinary day that most people have and most people forget. She was 34 years old. She wore a simple dark jacket, blue jeans, and white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. There was nothing about her appearance that stood out. To anyone watching, she looked like a regular woman heading back to her car after a long day of shopping. But appearances can be deeply misleading. Sarah had served in the United States Navy for 11 years. She had completed one of the most difficult military training programs in the world. She had gone through months of physical and mental testing that broke most people before they even reached the halfway point. She had trained in hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, survival in extreme conditions, and how to stay calm when everything around her was falling apart. She had deployed twice overseas and returned home with a quiet kind of strength that most people never develop in an entire lifetime. None of that was visible on the outside. That was the point. She walked through the parking structure on level 2, her footsteps echoing softly against the concrete floor. The garage smelled of oil and dust. The lights overhead were dim, a few of them flickering slightly. Most of the cars on that level belonged to people still inside the shopping center. It was not crowded. It was not empty either. It was the kind of space where people pass through quickly and think nothing of it. Sarah did not think much of it either. She was thinking about dinner. She did not notice them at first. They were good at not being noticed. Two men, both in their late 20s, had been circling the parking structure for the past 20 minutes. They had watched several people come and go. They had studied posture, pace, and presence. They were looking for someone specific, not by face or by name, but by profile. They wanted someone who seemed easy. Someone who would not fight back. Someone who would be too frightened to do anything other than comply. They chose Sarah. It was the worst decision of their lives. The taller of the two men, later identified as Marcus Webb, moved first. He had done this before. He knew exactly how to close the distance quickly, how to use surprise as a tool, how to make a person feel like the situation was already over before it had even started. He came up behind Sarah and grabbed her by the shoulders with both hands, slamming her back against a thick concrete pillar. The impact was hard. It was meant to be. It was meant to knock the breath out of her, to create a moment of pure shock where the body freezes and the mind goes blank. For most people, it works. That frozen second is all it takes for a situation to spiral completely out of control. Sarah did not freeze. Something happened inside her in that moment, not something dramatic, not something she had to think about. It was quieter than that. It was more like a light switching on in a room that was already prepared. Every muscle in her body, every reflex, every instinct sharpened immediately. The shock that would have paralyzed someone else moved through her and disappeared in less than a breath. She had trained for this. Not exactly this, not this specific parking garage, not these specific men, but this feeling. This sudden threat. This pressure. She had been placed into simulated danger hundreds of times during her military training. She had been grabbed, restrained, yelled at, disoriented, and pushed to the edge of what a person can handle. And every single time, she had learned to bring herself back to the center. To breathe. To think. To act. The second man, later identified as Derek Holt, stepped forward and positioned himself in front of the exit. He crossed his arms and said nothing. His job was to block. To make escape feel impossible. To let Marcus do the work while he made sure there was nowhere to run. They had a system. It had worked before. Marcus leaned in close, speaking in a low voice, making demands. He wanted her bag. He wanted her phone. He wanted her to understand that she had no options. Sarah let him finish. Then she moved. What happened next lasted approximately 90 seconds. Those who study self-defense and combat will understand how much can happen in 90 seconds when one person is trained and the other is not. Those who have never experienced it may find it difficult to picture. It was not loud. It was not wild. There was no screaming, no chaotic scramble, no dramatic chase. It looked almost controlled, the way a surgeon's hands look controlled during a procedure, precise, deliberate, efficient. Sarah used the pillar behind her as leverage. She shifted her weight in a way that broke Marcus's grip without warning. She applied a restraint technique she had practiced thousands of times, one designed to bring down a larger, heavier person by using their own force against them. Marcus went to the ground before he fully understood what was happening. He did not get back up. Derek saw this and took one step forward. Then he stopped. There was a moment, a very brief moment, where something in his expression changed. It was not quite fear. It was more like confusion. The situation had inverted itself in a way that made no sense to him, and his mind was struggling to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. That hesitation was enough. Sarah moved toward him quickly and used the side of a parked car to control him, applying pressure to specific points on his arm and shoulder that made resistance extremely uncomfortable. She spoke clearly and firmly, telling him to stay still. He did. She kept one hand on Derek. With the other, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. She dialed 911. Her voice, when she spoke to the dispatcher, was calm. She gave her exact location, described both men clearly, and explained what had happened. The dispatcher later said that in all her years of taking emergency calls, she had never heard a caller sound that composed. A woman named Patricia Owens had been sitting in her car on level 2, waiting for her husband to return from the store. She had seen the entire thing unfold through her windshield. She sat completely still throughout, too stunned to move. When it was over, she called her husband and told him to hurry. Then she called 911 as well, not knowing Sarah had already done it. I didn't understand what I was watching, Patricia later told investigators. I kept waiting for her to run or scream. But she just handled it. Like it was something she had done before. Police arrived within 4 minutes. 2 officers came up the ramp first, hands ready, not sure what they were walking into. What they found was not what the dispatcher's description had prepared them for. They expected a victim waiting to be helped. Instead, they found a calm woman standing upright, one man seated on the ground with his back against a car, and another man kneeling nearby, both of them still and quiet. One of the officers, a 12-year veteran of the force named Officer James Tran, later said that he had to process the scene for a full 3 seconds before he understood it. My brain kept trying to flip the picture, he said. I was looking for the threat. I kept thinking I was missing something. Sarah identified herself immediately. She showed her veteran identification and explained what had happened in clear, precise terms. She described the sequence of events, the positions of the men, and the techniques she had used, all without being asked for most of it. She understood that clarity in this moment mattered. She wanted the officers to have everything they needed to do their jobs correctly. Marcus Webb and Derek Holt were both placed in handcuffs and transported to the local police station. They were charged with aggravated assault and attempted robbery. A search of their records revealed that this was not the first time either of them had done something like this. They had worked together before. They had a pattern. And for a long time, that pattern had worked. It did not work that evening. In the days that followed, the story spread. A local news outlet picked it up first, framing it around the security camera footage from the parking structure. The footage showed the entire incident, and when it was released to the public, it spread quickly. People watched it and rewatched it. They shared it with friends and family. They left comments that ranged from disbelief to admiration to long, thoughtful reflections on what it meant. Sarah gave one statement to the press. It was short. She said she was grateful that no one was seriously hurt. She said she did not want to be seen as unusual or exceptional. She said that what she did was the result of training that many people in the military go through, and that the real story, if there was one, was about the importance of preparation and the danger of assumption. Then she stopped giving interviews. This was very much in keeping with who she was. People who knew Sarah, former colleagues, training partners, a handful of close friends, described her the same way, almost without exception. They used words like steady and quiet and reliable. They said she was someone who never needed the room to notice her. They said she had a way of being the most capable person present without ever making anyone feel lesser for it. Her mother, when reached by one reporter who tracked down her phone number, said simply, she has always been like that. Since she was a little girl, she just figured things out. What the story opened up, beyond Sarah herself, was a wider conversation. It appeared on news programs and podcast discussions and opinion columns. It asked questions that people had not thought about in quite that way before. How do we decide who looks dangerous and who does not? How do we decide who is capable of handling a threat and who needs to be protected? What assumptions do we carry, often without realizing it, about women and physical capability? These were not new questions. But the footage from that parking garage made them feel new. Made them feel immediate and real and worth sitting with. There were people, of course, who felt the need to add qualifiers. Who pointed out that Sarah was exceptional, that her training was rare, that this was not a story most people could relate to. And that was true, in a narrow sense. Most people have not completed a military training program. Most people do not have 11 years of service. Most people would have responded to that situation very differently, and there is no shame in that. But the people who understood the deeper point were not claiming that every woman is secretly a trained warrior. They were pointing at something else. They were pointing at the habit of looking at a person and deciding, before knowing anything about them, what they are and are not capable of. They were pointing at the danger of that habit, not just for the person being underestimated, but for the person doing the underestimating. Marcus Webb and Derek Holt had done exactly that. They had looked at Sarah and seen only the surface. They had seen a small woman alone in a dim garage and made a series of decisions based entirely on that image. They had not considered that the image might be incomplete. They had not imagined that the person they were looking at might have spent a decade training to respond to exactly this kind of situation. That failure of imagination had consequences. Sarah, for her part, moved on with her life with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She returned to her consulting work. She went back to her routines, early mornings, long runs, careful meals, evenings reading or watching the kind of slow documentaries that she found calming. She did not frame herself as a symbol or a representative of anything larger. She was simply a person who had been trained well and had responded to a situation correctly. But the story stayed in people's minds. It stayed because it was the kind of story that asks something of the person hearing it. It does not let you sit passively. It makes you think about your own assumptions. It makes you wonder how many times you have looked at someone and drawn a quiet, automatic conclusion about what they were or were not capable of. It makes you wonder how often those conclusions were wrong. There is a particular kind of danger in certainty. The certainty that you know what you are seeing. The certainty that the person in front of you is exactly what they appear to be. Marcus and Derek were certain. They had done this before, and their certainty had been confirmed each time. They saw a pattern and they followed it, the way people follow habits, without questioning, without pausing, without considering that this time might be different. This time was very different. Sarah stood in that parking garage, steady and unhurried, while two officers processed the scene around her. She answered every question put to her. She corrected one small factual error in the initial report without any emotion. She waited until she was told she was free to go. Then she walked to her car, put her bag in the back seat, and drove home. She made dinner. She ate quietly. She went to bed at her normal time. The next morning, she got up before sunrise and went for a run, the way she always did. The air was cold and the streets were mostly empty and her footsteps were steady on the pavement. She was not thinking about the night before. She was thinking about the day ahead. She was thinking about a client meeting and a report she needed to finish and whether she had remembered to buy coffee. She was thinking about the ordinary things that ordinary people think about. Because despite everything, despite the training, the deployments, the discipline, the quiet strength that most people never see and never suspect, she was, at the end of it all, a person living her life. Doing her work. Carrying her history inside her without advertising it. And that is perhaps the most important thing the story leaves behind. Not the footage. Not the headlines. Not the conversation it sparked. But the simple truth that a person can hold extraordinary capability inside a completely ordinary exterior. That what you see is rarely the whole picture. That the woman walking alone through a parking garage in a plain jacket and white sneakers might be carrying something invisible, something built through years of effort and sacrifice, that you will never see coming. Until it is too late to wish you had looked more carefully.